Hi Dixons. For those new to Dixons who haven't watched our launch video, my name is Luke Sparks, a founding principal of Dixons Trinity Academy in Bradford, and I now work as an executive director across our trust. If you haven't watched our launch video, I would urge you to do so, as it provides a really great overview of this new project and the reasons for making it open source. Essentially, we've decided to codify what we do, especially around crafting culture, mainly to help those schools that join our trust as we expand into the Northwest, but also to extend our reach even further and work towards our mission, so that those who are interested in our approach but don't work for Dixons can find out more. So our thinking is about quick, accessible, agile commentary that can be strung together into coherent sequences or playlists, but also has efficacy alone. So today's video kicks off our playlist that explores who we, Dixons, are and what we stand for. And I'm delighted to be joined by our CEO, Sir Nick Weller.
Hello, so I'm Nick. I was the second principal of the school that we're sat in today, our founding school, Dixons City Academy, back in 2006 when I was appointed. And then since 2009, when we took on our first sponsored academy, Dixons Ollerton, we've been growing a mat now of 12 academies across Bradford and Leeds, sponsored, turnaround, failing schools from special measures, and of course free schools as well to address the need for additional places where standards are low or where there's not insufficient schools. So currently we have 3 primaries, 2 all through, 6 secondary and 1 sixth form academy, and we're roughly now 10,000 students and 1,000 staff, which is roughly 10 times where we were back in 1990 when this school first started.
So we've grown very steadily as a trust, although not as fast as some. We're, and as you talked about, we're going to, we've doubled in the last 5 years. We aim to double in the next 5 years again as we extend to Manchester and Liverpool. So hopefully around 24 academies, around 20,000 students, probably around 2,000 staff by 2025. That's going to be our most ambitious and challenging growth plan in the history of Dixons.
Yeah, well it is, yes. And but on the other hand, for the last 2 years we've been the second highest performing trust in the country for Progress 8. All of our academies are good or outstanding. Majority of them, in fact, are outstanding, those that have got there. But on the other hand, I know you're going to deal with this when you do a video later about the 4 key questions we've got. But the first one of those is, why do you exist? We've got a very clear mission, which is to challenge educational and social disadvantage in the north of England. And it's not enough that we sit on our laurels or rest on our complacency and just enjoy what we've got. We have a mission and a moral imperative to spread ourselves further. And the most logical way to grow is really down for us with the urban model that we have is down the M62 to Manchester and Liverpool, as well as Bradford and Leeds. And I'm sure these videos too actually will be a help in that, in reaching a trust across a broader distance as well. I'm sure that the main training we do obviously will be physical and face to face, and the support we will be there. But nevertheless, I think these videos will be a chance for people to re-watch certain things and to reflect at their own leisure and really embed the practice that we want them to take on.
Absolutely, and as Jenny and I talked about in the launch video, Dixons Open Source is there for those that want to use it. There's lots of ways you can run a school. We certainly haven't created this channel to tell people what to do or to make out that that our way is the best way. For those outside Dixons, it's the theory, the concepts, the frameworks that we're going to share that really matter. It's not the specific ways those things manifest themselves at Dixons. So as we move into this challenging period, what do you see as the most important things to bear in mind during a period of growth?
Yes, I mean there is always that challenge, that tension really between scaling up and the danger of in the process of that losing what made you great in the first place, of diluting your impact. And of course we've taken inspiration from many places. We've visited private schools, public schools in this country. We've visited some excellent state schools in this country. We've also travelled abroad, and those charter schools in the US which often started off as one school, as Dixons City did, and grew a trust of schools around them. We've taken particularly inspiration from them. I think their experience really resonates with us. And I was lucky enough to hear Julie Jackson speak, president of Uncommon Schools, recently, and she recommended a book called The Founder's Mentality, and that dealt in detail really with that, how you avoid becoming more bureaucratic, more obsessed with control, more obsessed with systems, and how you can preserve that sort of initiative and drive and innovation that made you successful in the first place. So it's not about clinging on to the past, but it is about remembering what made you great in the first place and trying to adapt that to the new future that you're facing.
Yeah, it's really important to look back. I mean, we talked to our senior leaders about really understanding and capitalising on their academy's endowments. And a school or trust history can become mythologized a little bit, can't it? I know we've been inspired by a number of charter schools. I mean, you just mentioned Uncommon. We've also been and looked at we've been First Line, KIP, and so on. And when we get new staff joining our trust, we often show them that KIP video where the co-founder Dave Levin kind of tells the story of them knocking on doors when they were trying to recruit students for their kind of first ever school. I mean, that's something we actually did at Dixons Trinity Chapeltown as well. But those stories, they really are a key artefact, aren't they, when crafting culture?
Yes, they are. They certainly are, and I think those stories become very, very important as you grow and to hold on to those and keep retelling those stories. But I think the other thing, of course, about charter schools is, similar to us, they very much have that kind of insurgent mission, and that's what really resonates with us. I think we're both trying to change a system which I suppose anybody would accept probably does not work well enough at the moment, especially for disadvantaged children. I think many teachers in areas of high deprivation would identify with that, and of course that was the purpose of the original CTC opening in the school that we're in at the moment, and that can be difficult. On the first day of this school, there were placards and demonstrations outside the gates of protesting against the opening of this new Thatcherite abomination that was about to be started in Bradford. So it was controversial at the time too, actually, wasn't it? The idea that you actually involve business people. These days you have businessmen are actively recruited onto governing bodies, but in those days the idea that a businessman had anything to offer a school as a governor was highly controversial. And indeed, of course, originally there were going to be 45 of schools like this, 45 CTCs, and they could only open 15 of them because they just couldn't get the corporate companies, the kind of, the BPs and, the big corporate companies interested. The only people who would do it were the kind of self-made men. Our sponsor we were very lucky with, we still bear the name Dixons, of course, and Stanley Calms, now Lord Calms, he starts off with one photography shop and he ends up with the biggest electrical retailer in the whole of Europe. So when you've met somebody like that, whether or not you entirely identify with all of their own political ideology, you certainly know you've met somebody, and his drive and his inspiration was certainly key early on to this school. So state education needs to change, and that insurgent mission of those charter schools is certainly what we're about. And I would say that it's not just back in 1990 that applies. So I'd say that all 12 of our academies have been part of that insurgent mission, whether it's a free school startup in an area that desperately needs it, or whether it's stepping in to take on a failing school, or that insurgent mission is something that has run throughout the whole of our history and continues on to Manchester and to Liverpool.
And another feature of our culture is detail, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And in these videos, we really want to drill down and bridge that gap between the theory and the practice. That means sharing our big ideas, but then going as granular as possible. So, for example, we will be sharing our approaches to microscripting, across a range of areas. But our success really is rooted in simplicity and rigour, isn't it? Mm.
Yeah, I think that's right. And that is another aspect of that founder's mentality, really. If you think of founders of some businesses like Bill Gates at Microsoft or Steve Jobs at Apple, they are specialists in those areas. What they're really concerned about is their product. And often as businesses grow, that product development and everything tends to sort of fall apart a bit. They get more consultants and accountants on their board maybe, and that focus on the front line and supporting that front line, and that kind of inverted pyramid where leadership sees itself as supporting and serving that front line. I think that can get lost as you grow, and indeed as a mat, there will be a danger that you've got too kind of top down. So I think the way that we refine processes, the way that we, as you say, focus on that front line, the way we avoid constant initiatives, trying to do new things all the time, but actually try to refine our practice in detail and describe that practice in detail, I think that is very, very, that's very rooted absolutely in our culture. And of course, this school, CTC, another mythologized story is Sir John Lewis standing in the middle of Newby, confronted by this muddy slope with nothing on it, and telling him, that is your school. You start with a completely blank piece of paper, and Sir John and Hilary too. That's what they did with the original school. And of course, you did the same thing again with Trinity. And these days, we have, I think, obviously a clear idea of what our model is. And when you go through those 4 questions, that will start to emerge. But I would say that every sponsored school and every free school since, because it has served a new community, has given us the reason to go back to that model and to redefine it and to test that model and say, is this really improving the life chances of these children in this community? So I think that starting with a blank piece of paper is absolutely key to our culture, and that above all that focus on detail and that focus on the front line and attempting to define that and refine that as we go forward, and not, as I say, darting off after every new initiative.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
And as you've alluded to, Stanley, or now Lord Calmes, was a real influence in those early days. But what did a businessman bring to Dixons?
Well, again, it goes back to the founder's mentality. I think one thing to bear in mind also with say new businesses, for example, is that someone's often mortgaged their house to start it. So the money they're spending is their own money. So and also he also donated money towards the start of this school. In fact, he donated money towards the building of this Lord Calmes Theatre. So I think that focus on cost and where you spend your money is certainly something that's very, very strong in our history. And that doesn't always mean driving down costs. I mean, we very consciously spend more on teaching, for example, and I'm sure the ESFA might criticise various aspects of that. They might say your teaching costs are too high, but we save money in other areas because that's where we think our money makes the most difference. So that cost is certainly one thing. I think that bias for action, that being prepared to take risk. Another mythologized story is John Lewis turning up every year with his latest set of absolutely wonderful results, expecting, maybe he deserved a pat on the back, and not getting it. All he gets is the question, "What are you doing? What are you doing next?" So that sort of drive forward, that drive for growth, that aversion to bureaucracy. I think too, actually, back in 1990, a certain sort of professionalism that at that time. Things have changed since then, but I think at that time you couldn't really say that teaching, had that imbued within it, that professionalism. The idea that this was a place of work, and not just for staff, but for students as well, and that demanded a certain level of behaviour and a certain way of behaving towards each other. I think that was very, very strong. I think, though, perhaps the biggest thing he brought was that focus on the bottom line and on results and on accountability, because this was before Ofsted. Remember, this is before league tables, and I think that the more I reflect on that, the more I think that's actually quite a powerful thing that's lasted through 30 years. Because I think at Dixons, that feeling of accountability is very much driven from within. People feel accountable to their team. They feel accountable not just to the top. They feel accountable to the students, their they're serving. And I think that accountability is driven. There's a lot of debate, isn't there, about intelligent accountability and whether Ofsted should do this and the league table should do that these days. I don't think we've been over-obsessed with that. You've always said we don't do things for Ofsted. And I think that ownership of results and that ownership of our own accountability is something that lasts to this day.
So then, Nick, the big question really, do we still have the founder's mentality here at Dixons?
Well, I would argue, obviously this might be for other people to judge, but nevertheless, I would argue in terms of attitude and in terms of mentality and in terms of general outlook, I would say, yes, I think we do. Obviously, we do not have the same vision. This school, was very proud of it. It was independent of the local authority. It was also independent of the admissions code to a certain extent as well. It was probably independent of things it shouldn't have been independent of. These days, anyone who's a principal within a MAT would say that independence is not the first thing that comes to mind when they think of their job. So it's not it's not the same there. It's not the same vision. It's not the same strategic plan. This was a standalone school in Bradford. It was meant to be a beacon of excellence in an area of deprivation and poor standards. We now actually reach out into that community and try and actively drive up standards by taking on new schools and now moving, of course, to Liverpool and Manchester. It's not the same mission. It's no longer creating talented citizens, I think it was originally. Now it is challenging educational and social disadvantage. It's not the same operating model. That independence is now aligned autonomy, and I'm sure you'll come on to that in a later video, so I'm not going to spoiler alert and all of that. But nevertheless, it's not about a return to the past. It essentially is about scaling up what you do without killing the culture that made you successful in the first place. And it's about that insurgent mission, that obsession with the front line, and that owner's mindset. And I would say that those three things do persist to this day.
So thank you, Nick. I really appreciate you taking the time to kick off this playlist. I always enjoy listening to your reflections on the founder's mentality and why those themes resonate with us so much at Dixons. And that's it for this video, where we hope you enjoy exploring this playlist as we drill down on who we are and what we stand for.